Thank you for joining us for the first 2025 Small Business Workshop, Choosing and Maintaining the Right Business Structure, hosted by Laura Beth Pleasant and sponsored by People's Bank. While we weren't able to bring our full-day West Texas Small Business Summit event to Lubbock this year, we're excited to continue supporting our small business community through this new workshop series. This is the first of 3 sessions, each focused on providing practical tools and resources to help you grow. If you find today's topic helpful, we encourage you to register for the upcoming workshops as well. Our speaker, Laura Beth Pleasant, is originally from Willis, Texas. She received agriculture scholarships that brought her out to Texas Tech University. Laura Beth received both her undergraduate and law degrees from Texas Tech. She graduated in 2002 with a degree in agricultural education and then earned her Doctor of Jurisprudence in 2006. Laura Beth's previous teaching experience combined with her law and education degrees led her into a position at Texas Tech University, where she currently teaches business law at Rawls College of Business as an associate professor of practice. As a professor of practice, she continues to practice law part-time at Pleasant Law Firm, which is a boutique firm with an exclusive focus on estate planning, guardianship, probate, and business law. Laura Beth enjoys the counseling side of law, and she has made it the #1 goal of her firm to provide quality, effective, and affordable advocacy for her clients' legal needs.
Kind of my intro said, I do practice law in the areas of estate planning, so that's like wills and trusts and powers of attorney. I do guardianship, so when people lose mental capacity, right, which that could look like someone who is 17 and turns 18 and they have like a child that was born with or has traumatic brain injury or severe autism or Down syndrome, and I help their parents get guardianship over them so they can continue to take care of them like they always have, right? Because just because the calendar flipped and now they're legally 18, they can make their own decisions, even though they probably mentally can't. But then I also, on the other end of the spectrum, help families get guardianship for someone who maybe has Alzheimer's or dementia or something like that, right? Probate is just the legal process of taking what was someone's when they were alive and transferring it to whoever it's supposed to go to when they pass. So I do probate law and then, of course, business law. So, and I don't teach at the law school. Like she said, I teach at Rawls. I teach at the business school. So basically any accounting, finance, management, marketing, any business major that comes through Texas Tech University, B-Law is what I teach on a regular basis. That's a required course. So it's just enough so they don't get themselves in trouble, right? So what we're talking about today is about business entities, which is about, I'm trying to think, like 5 chapters of what I teach in a normal semester. So we're kind of just scrunching it all into kind of one summarized hour-long talk today, okay? So it says BE&U. BE stands for business entities, and when we say that, that could be business entities, business models, business organizations, like that's all the same thing, right? You can kind of use those interchangeably. Okay, so basic forms of business. Now, we're going to talk about sole proprietorships, obviously, which is the easiest form of business, right? And then we're going to talk about partnerships, and then we're going to go to corporations, then we'll come back to hybrids, because it's hard for me to teach you a hybrid or what the hybrids are if you don't know what they're a hybrid of, right? And the 2 hybrids we'll talk about, they're kind of hybrids of partnerships and corporations. So that's kind of where we're going. Okay, so just starting with a sole proprietorship. A sole proprietorship is just a business owned and operated by one person. It is really just an extension of yourself, okay? It's not a separate legal entity. So your taxes, right? You're just going to pay your own taxes. Usually it's like, well, I think like a schedule. I'm not a tax attorney either. I think like a Schedule C is kind of what you just fill out, and that's on your own tax return. Like the business isn't going to have their own tax return or anything like that. The biggest problem with a sole proprietorship, and so I defined unlimited liability for you there, because the biggest problem with a sole proprietorship is the fact that you have unlimited liability. Okay, meaning that all of your assets are at risk. And so, if somebody, in fact, I'll tell you, I had an initial consultation with a client. This was several years ago, and it was the daughter that brought her mom in. The mom was probably in her 80s, daughter was probably in her 60s, 50s, 60s, and mom had to get up to go to the restroom, and the daughter, we were just kind of just visiting, and I was like, so what do you do? And she was like, oh, I own a restaurant. I was like, well, how? I was like, I teach business law, so I'm always interested. How is your business set up? And she was like, oh, I'm just a sole proprietorship. What? was like, are you serious? And she said, yeah. She goes, but I have really good insurance, right? That's the key. If you're a sole, because I'm like, somebody could walk in there and slip and fall. Somebody could eat something and have an allergic reaction. You have to think about all of your liability potential when you're starting a business. And so anything that has a brick and mortar, like you actually have a building, like a physical, so many things are online now, right? And I'm like, probably start a sole proprietorship for a lot of those. But that I was like, really? So the biggest thing is if you have a sole proprietorship and there's a lot of potential for liability issues, right, where somebody could get hurt and sue you, have really good commercial insurance. Okay. And don't, and I tell my students, don't just get on esurance.com and buy some policy, like sit down with an insurance agent that does commercial insurance and talk about what is your potential liability there. Like what needs to be covered? Are we talking vehicles, right? Because that's a whole different beast. Are we talking vehicles? Is it the building? Is it the stuff in the building? I had somebody who slipped and fell walking out of my law office the other day. And there's signs and things that like say, watch your step, and you know what I mean? But they're just wobbly. So anyway, but you have to think about legal exposure because all of the debts of the business, right? Even if it's not like somebody slips and falls and sues you, if you sign up for a 3-year lease and then you close your business after 2 years, you personally are liable for that 3rd year of that lease, right? So all the debts and obligations of the business you're personally liable for. And so that's the biggest downfall really of a sole proprietorship. The great thing is that you're the only one that owns it. So you can do what you want to do. If you want to close up shop early one day and go to Vegas, you can, right? You don't have to ask anybody. You don't have to worry about anybody else. So there are also a couple of other ways, and we'll talk about those, that you can own a business by yourself without the liability potential, right? It's still by far the most popular form of business organization in the United States. I really feel like not only because it's the easiest to set up, it's the fastest to set up. A lot of people will start a sole proprietorship with the intention of, I'm going to convert this to an LLC. I'm going to convert this to an S Corp at some point, but I'm going to let it grow first, right? In fact, I have a friend who we teach at Tech together, and she kind of helps people set up partnerships and LLCs and things on the side. And she's like, I won't even draft documents for them until they make enough money to pay me for the drafting. Because she's like, if you can't make $1,500 or $2,000 or whatever it is, she's like, you don't need me yet. You know what I mean? You don't need all of that. So once you have kind of an idea and get established, that's just her. Like I'll set them up for people. But okay, so how to form a sole proprietorship in Texas. I tell my students, I'm like, this isn't on your test, but this is just real life, right? So this is what I wanted to give y'all. My sophomore year at Texas Tech, I had to figure this out. Like I started my own sole proprietorship out of my dorm room and was like, ooh, what do I do? So I've done this. It's not difficult, right? Choose your business name. You literally go to the state comptroller's website, make sure you're not stealing somebody else's business name because you don't want to do that and get sued. So you don't want to do that to your business, right? You don't want to start something, make business cards, have all the swag and start a website. Buy a domain name and all those things, and then have to flip because you've stolen somebody else's name. So file and assume business name with the county clerk. So if you're in Lubbock County, you would go to the Lubbock County clerk. If, like me, I didn't need any licenses or permits or zoning clearances. But if, like, let's say you're going to start a food truck, there's some licenses and some permits and some things that you're going to have to get. So depending on what your business is. And then from there, y'all, you go to ein.gov, and y'all, when you search, get a employer identification number, get a tax ID number, get an EIN. 4 or 5 different things come up first before the actual irs.gov like website. It's people saying, hey, pay us $30 and we'll get you your tax ID number. Y'all, the government will gladly give you one for free. Do not pay somebody for a tax ID number. Okay. So anyway, so just scroll down a few of those like paid for add to it, and they look so legit. But and go make sure you're the irs.gov ending. And you can just fill out your name, your social security number, the business name, the business like address and all of that stuff. They will assign you a tax ID number. Okay. Now, whether you're going to have employees or not, it's still called an EIN, an employer identification number. That way you've got it, right? So eventually if you have employees, that's fine. We're not owning them. And then this is what gives you what you need to go open up a business bank account. Okay. And I tell people, even if it's a sole proprietorship, keep it separate so that it's business and personal is always separate. Okay. That way, if you do move to something that is protected, you don't want them to commingle. Okay. So that way, like if you go open up your business bank account in your name, so your personal bank account, it'll be your name and your social. The business bank account will be the business name and that tax ID number. Okay. That way you're not using your social for that business bank account. See, it's easy, right? And then you literally just start doing business and making money, and it's super simple. So as far as partnerships go, there are 3 different kinds of partnerships, right? And I generally, just because I'm a visual person, literally when I start teaching business entities to my students every semester, I draw this. So if you're a visual person, this might help. This is kind of all the ones we're going to talk about, right? So from sole proprietorship, the simplest, easiest form of business, all the way to corporations, like a C Corp that you mentioned. It's the most complicated form of business, okay? These 3 right here are the 3 partnerships we're about to talk about. Then we have this bracket that has LLC and S Corp. So we're going to talk about those here in a minute, okay? But that kind of shows you from most like simplest all the way to most complicated kind of where we're going. But we have a general partnership, so a GP, because for a general partnership, you have to have at least 2 general partners, okay? So you can have 15, you can have 5, you can have whatever, but you can't have a partnership by yourself, right? You got to have a partner. So that's your general partnership. Then when we get to limited partnership, it's limited, meaning there's limited liability somewhere, right? So we're going to talk about that. But you have to have at least 1 general and at least 1 limited, right? So you can have, again, any number. You can have 1 general partner who's kind of running the show, and then you can have a bunch of limited partners, which a lot of times those are your investors, okay? Like they're just investing. So they have limited liability. Their liability is only up to the amount that they've invested, and they can never be liable for anything more than that, okay? So any number of those, but at least 1 of each. And then your LLP is a limited liability partnership. These are for professional businesses only, okay? So like if you look up like the big 4 accounting firms in the United States, they're all LLPs, okay? Like Ernst & Young and like some of those big ones, right? So accounting firms, law firms, doctors' offices, sometimes LLPs are just for like professionals, okay? But it's there because, look, they're all limited partners. So they all, if you're a general partner, you can control, manage, and run the business. But you're giving up, like you have unlimited liability if you're controlling, managing, and running the business. If you're a limited partner, you have limited liability, but you have no say in running the business. That's why I said you're usually just an investor, okay? But the cool thing with an LLP is all of the partners are limited partners, but they all can control, manage, and run the business together. All a little different. A lot of people, you can have a general partnership without, or you can have a partnership. Let's go general. You can have a general partnership without anything in writing. Okay, you don't have to have a partnership agreement to actually start the partnership. The problem with that is it's the rule book for the business, right? So when things go bad, then your default, and I think, the Uniform Partnership Act governs the operation of partnerships in the absence of an express agreement. So if you and your partners didn't sit down and actually draft a partnership agreement when y'all started, y'all are like, oh, we got this partnership and we're just going to start sharing profits and losses and doing business, right? You can do that, but basically the government has written your rule book for you, and that's what you're going to follow, okay? And notice it says, therefore, the partners are free to establish rules for their partnership that differ from what's in the UPA, and that's why I say have your own partnership agreement. I also tell clients, kind of like a marriage, there's always a honeymoon period in a business, right? If you're working with people and everything, everybody's all excited, it's new, like all this promise and hope of what we're going to do and build and all this stuff. And then when things happen, and when life happens, like you don't want to have to figure it out then, right? It's better. That's why when I sit like in an initial consultation with people and I'm like, okay, well, what about this? What happens if y'all can't decide? Or what happens if y'all have an argument? And, whatever. I'll tell you, I had 2 clients. They were best friends. They started like a boutique together. And their husbands, because the girls are best friends and they got married, their husbands became best friends. So like the 4 of them did everything together. And so I'm in this initial consultation and it's just a general partnership. And y'all, one thing about general partners, like we said, they both have unlimited liability. So now you're sharing liability, but it's still unlimited for both of you. So they're like, we're just going to have really good insurance, right? We talked about that. But I said, okay, so what happens if, y'all have a disagreement and can't decide on a decision that needs to be made for the business? And they're like, oh, well, we'll just get our husbands to help us make the decision. I was like, well, if they want to stay married and one's going to side with you and one's going to side with you, now you got 2 against 2. What are you going to do now? Right? And they were like, oh, we'll work it out. I said, go home and think about it, right? What do y'all want to happen? Because we got to do something. Like, we're not just going to leave this up in the air. I read a case, I think it was in law school. It wasn't I didn't draft it, but it was 2 businessmen who were very successful businessmen. And this was like their 15th business they started, but they started this first business together. And they decided, if they're like, we're both super savvy businessmen, and if we both are super passionate about something that we can't decide, like between the 2 options, then we're just going to flip a coin because they're probably both good options. That was literally in their partnership agreement, right? That they were going to flip a coin. I'm like, okay. So, but anyway, so these 2 girls, they went back and they thought about it, talked to their husbands. There was a woman at church. They all went to the same church. There was a woman at their church that was a successful businesswoman. She had owned several businesses. They admired her. They looked up to her in their faith, but also in business. And so they said, hey, can we make her our decision maker? And I said, have you talked to her? They said, yes. So literally in their partnership agreement, it says we will try to come up with a decision together. If not, we will get our husband's input and see if they can help us make a decision. If not, we will both kind of make a presentation to this woman, and she will be the deciding vote on what's best for our business. That is not in any statute anywhere, right? So the great thing about a partnership agreement is it can literally be drafted for you and your situation, your business, and your partnership. And it can, anything y'all decide, we can put in a partnership agreement. So, but things that you need to look for, think about how profits and losses are shared. So read, if you're not the one that drafted it, right, or you didn't go in together to meet with an attorney to draft it, somebody else's attorney drafted it, it might not be drafted to benefit you. So make sure you read before you sign anything. I tell students that all the time. So how profits and losses are shared, conflict resolution, decision-making power, duties of partners. I tell people, yes, you can always change your duties, but it's easier if you look up 5 years from now, and y'all said in the beginning, I'm going to do these 5 things and you're going to do these 5 things. And you look up 5 years from now and you're doing 7, right? And they're doing 3, and you're killing yourself trying to, you're just stressed out and at your wit's end. It's way easier to go to them and say, hey, this is what we said we were going to do. I'm having a hard time doing this right now. You know what I mean? I need you to either pick up some slack, or we need to hire some help, or I need more money, whatever it is you need, right? But it's easier if it's in black and white from the beginning. Okay. And you can amend a partnership agreement anytime you need to. So, what happens at death or dissolution? That's a big one. I have, 2 women that I've talked to about drafting a partnership agreement that own a cattle company. Okay. And one of them is single and does not have children. One is married and had 2 children. And so it looks very different as to what happens when one of us dies, or if one of us dies while we still have this partnership, what are we going to do? And so kind of our solution was, because one was completely fine with leaving her half to the other one, but because she was single and didn't have kids, right? But the other one's like, well, I don't know if my husband or my kids would be okay with me just giving you my half. And so what we ended up doing was the partnership now pays for a life insurance policy on both of their lives. Okay. And so it's enough that, I'll say it's $100,000 to half of the business value. Okay. So it pays out to the partnership on the death of one of them. And so that's an influx of cash, so they can immediately buy the other one out. Right. So there's a first right of refusal for buyout, and then that money will be there to allow the buyout, right? Even if they don't have the cash in the business bank account at that time. So there's things you can do, but you've got to think about, because there's some people, you might love having a business with your best friend, but you can't imagine running a business with your best friend's wife, right? Or something in that situation. So just think about death or dissolution, divorce, what is this going to look like? Okay. Now let's talk about taxation, pass-through taxation or partnership taxation. Okay. When we get into corporations, a lot of times people will say, I'm taxed like an S Corp, okay? Or I'm an S Corp. You got to be very careful, especially CPAs. CPAs will use S Corp all the time. The business might not actually be an S Corp. It might be an LLC that's being taxed like an S Corp. So that's why I wanted to be able to draw this for you. So pass-through taxation, it just means your business is a pass-through entity. The all partnerships themselves do not pay taxes. Okay, understand that. The partnership business itself does not pay taxes. You have the general partnership, right? And you have these two partners. We call them partner one and partner two. Let's say after deductions and everything, they have $200,000 of tax liability, the partnership does. So the partnership, their CPA or the partnership, whoever's going to do their taxes that year, they file an informational return. So you still have to file a return, but it's just for informational purposes to the IRS, okay? They're not paying in anything, okay? So then let's say it says, okay, we owe $200,000 or taxes on $200,000 or whatever. So it's called a pass-through or partnership taxation, pass-through taxation, because the tax liability passes through. That's why we have these arrows here. Passes through to the partners, right? So this partner and this partner, if they're 50-50 partners, okay, then they're going to pay taxes on $100,000 and they're going to pay taxes on $100,000, right? On their personal tax return. Got it? That's why it's pass-through taxation. So make sure you know partnerships don't pay taxes. The partners do based on what the partners do. And you can vote. Like if, I don't know, let's say y'all only made $60,000 each this year. You didn't even make $100,000, like enough to pay taxes on $100,000. So y'all can vote if the money's sitting in like a savings account at the business. Y'all can vote to make an extra distribution to the partners to help you pay taxes, right? Like you can do that if the money's sitting there. Problem is, if the money's not sitting there and you got to pay taxes, that can hurt. So that's important to know, pass through, because in a minute we're going to look at corporate taxation, and I want you to see the difference. Okay. So limited partnerships. I've asked a friend in town, she owns a salon and it's a franchise. I'm like, but Tony and Guy here in Lubbock, she was running the salon at JCPenney's, but if y'all remember, there was a Tony and Guy in the mall a long, long time ago, like early 2000s, late 90s. They shut down. Well, so Tony and Guy, their corporate headquarters in the Dallas area, and they realized they don't have a Tony and Guy in West Texas anymore. Like, hey, we're missing out on that market. So they actually sought her out. That doesn't usually happen with franchises. Usually you reach out to the franchisor. They reached out to her, asked her, and they were like, hear us out. Can we fly you to corporate headquarters? And she did, right? They flew her to Dallas. She was kind of thinking like free weekend in Dallas, right? They flew her there, put her up in a hotel. Well, they introduced her to, I think it's two men from like the Houston area who wanted to invest in a Tony and Guy but knew nothing about running a salon. So long story short, what ended up happening is she is the general partner. She controls, manages, and runs the salon, right? But they have an LP, a limited partnership. You've got these two men from Houston who were her investors, who invested in the business. Now, obviously, they make money as a partner, but their liability is limited to what they initially put in, and it's never going to be, like if the salon gets sued, they're never on the hook for anything more than that. She could be, right? Because so your general partner always has unlimited liability, but your limited partner does not. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, and then like we said, LLPs are just for professionals. So any questions about, so corporations. So like I said, we're going to talk partnerships and then we're going to go corporations and then we'll come back to the hybrids. So a corporation is a business formed as a separate legal entity. Okay, it's almost like its own person. Okay, like corporations can own property like a person. Corporations have some constitutional rights like a person. Obviously they pay taxes like a person, or at least they should, right? All of those things. So, how to start a corporation, y'all, there are people who, like I said, with a partnership, they'll start a partnership because they don't worry about drafting a partnership agreement. Or sometimes people don't even realize they're starting a partnership, right? They start doing some things together and they start sharing profits and losses, their name's on a bank account or their name's on something else. And then one sues the other one and they're like, we didn't have a partnership. We never agreed. And the court will look, if y'all were sharing profits and losses, you had a partnership, right? So, and there's a couple other things they look at, but that's the biggest one. So a corporation, y'all, you definitely need a lawyer, okay, if you're going to start a corporation, because you need articles of incorporation drafted. That's what you start with, okay? Because you're incorporating, right? You're starting this business, you're incorporating, and so it's going to identify the name of the business, the purpose of the business, the original incorporators, right? So that's the original shareholders, like who's starting this business. How many shares are you starting with? Like all those things, okay? That the address, so that if you get sued, they know who to serve and where to serve, like who's the registered agent, all of those things. You file that in Texas. Anytime we're starting a business that has to be filed with the state, you're starting at the Secretary of State's office in Austin. Okay, so Secretary of State. So you file your articles of incorporation in the state you want to be incorporated in, because then that's never going to change, right? Like if you start in Texas, like Dr. Pepper started here, right? Dr. Pepper is a Texas corporation. So file that articles of incorporation. Once that's filed and you kind of get that file marked back, then the original shareholders are going to have your first meeting, right? Shareholder meeting. And that's where you're going to adopt the bylaws. Okay, the bylaws are kind of then the rule book for the business and a corporation. Okay, and if y'all been a part of any organization or group that had bylaws, right? Like y'all know what bylaws kind of look like. But this is just bylaws for a corporation. So this says like, how often do the shareholders meet? How many people are in the board of directors? How often do the board of directors meet? Like all of those things. Is this a for-profit? I mean, not for-profit, but is this a publicly held, right? If it's publicly held, publicly traded, you got a lot more paperwork to do, because now you're dealing with the SEC, right? And so, yeah, there's a lot of rules you got to follow, filings you have to meet, things like that. If you're publicly traded and people can buy shares of your corporation, like on the stock market. So, okay. So bylaws are a document that provide the rules for the meeting of the corporation. Yeah, let's talk about some of these words to know, and then we'll talk about taxes. So dividends. If they decide, like if they're making money, right, and the corporation's going to pay out to them, it pays out in what we call dividends. Okay. Now understand, corporation could be in a period of growth, or like maybe the economy is downturn and think things aren't good. You don't have to get paid out dividends all the time. But when the board of directors, or like when they decide like we're going to pay out, okay, they're called dividends. So a shareholder is who owns a corporation, right? You own shares of stock or shares of the corporation. And so if you purchase shares of stock in the corporation, that's what I said. A lot of corporations that we don't even know about are privately held or closely held corporations, meaning that 1, 2, 3, 5 people own all the shares in that corporation, and nobody else can ever buy into it. Okay. When you hear like Apple and like huge corporations, okay, that have shareholder meetings, it's because they have thousands of shareholders, because it's publicly traded and people can buy shares of stock. But when it says in perpetuity, corporations continue to live on in perpetuity, or another way to say that is it has perpetual existence. Like it continues to live on forever. So if you have, let's say you have 50 shares of Dr. Pepper stock, right, which is not Dr. Pepper anymore, it's like Dr. Pepper Keurig or something, like there's several have merged, right? But if you own 50 shares and you die, does Dr. Pepper die with you? No, right? Like you can leave in your will, or if you don't have a will with the Texas Estates Code where your stuff goes, it's just going to go to who your heirs are, who your beneficiary is in your will. They're now going to own your 50 shares of Dr. Pepper stock. So the corporation continues to live on in perpetuity until the shareholders vote to close it, right, to end it. And so, but like if you own a sole proprietorship and you die, the sole proprietorship dies with you. Okay, so that's why we said like sole proprietorship is kind of an extension of yourself. Corporation is a separate legal entity. Fiduciary duty, y'all, that's huge. So a fiduciary duty it's also called a fiduciary responsibility. It is the highest legal duty owed. Okay. You can have a duty of loyalty within this. You have a duty of loyalty and a duty of care. And so if you are on the board of directors, or if you are an officer, right? So we hear like CEO, CFO, COO, like your officers. Some corporations in their bylaws, instead of those titles, it's like president, vice president, like whatever it is, it's in the bylaws. It's the board of directors' job to fill those positions. Okay. So those officer positions and the board of directors, they all owe a fiduciary duty to the corporation, meaning that if you're in a board of directors meeting and y'all decide, hey, like next year, we need to buy 5 acres over on this side of town, right? Like we need to expand, and y'all start talking and planning. Well, let's say they don't realize it, but you and one of your friends have a business on the side and y'all flip properties. So you go to your friend and you're like, hey, let's go ahead and go buy that 10 acres over there. Let's separate it because they're going to be looking for 5 acres, and then we can make, you just found out information in a board of directors meeting and now you're using it to benefit yourself personally, right? You can't do that. That's breaching your fiduciary duty. You have to subserve your own interest and always put the corporation first, right? That's what a fiduciary duty is. So if the business that you're on the board, if they found out, right, they could sue you for breaching your fiduciary duty, and then you could owe lots of money, right? Excuse me. So, and you see a fiduciary duty not just here. If someone names you as an agent in their power of attorney, and you're acting as their agent, like maybe your spouse or your parent or friend, whoever, names you as an agent, and y'all, pet peeve, you're not a power of attorney. That's the document. I have people all the time, they're like, I'm my mom's power of attorney. No, you're not. You're her agent and named in the power of attorney, right? Like the power of attorney is just the paper. So if you're named as an agent, you owe a fiduciary duty to that. Like they're the principal, you're the agent. You owe them a fiduciary duty to act and do what's in their best interest when you're acting for them, not what's in your best interest. Okay. Same thing if you're the trustee of someone's trust. But in some of these other business entities, if you're managing the business at all, so if you're a general partner in a general partnership, general partner in an LP, any limited partnership in an or limited partner in an LLP, and then in a minute we're going to get to if you're a member in an LLC that's controlling, managing, running the business, you owe a fiduciary duty. Okay, so basically any role, like shareholders in a corporation, they don't owe a fiduciary duty, right? They might meet once a year and vote on some things, okay, but they don't owe a fiduciary duty. So be careful if you're in that role. Double taxation. So let's talk about what that looks like. This is corporate taxation. Another word for it is called double taxation, okay? Because the corporation pays taxes on the corporate level, right? And then if and when they pay out dividends to all these shareholders, that's income. So then they have to put that on their tax return and they have to pay taxes. So level 1, the corporation, level 2, the shareholders. So that's why we call it double taxation. So liability, y'all, the best part about corporations is the liability protection, okay? Because, and we call it, it says, courts are extremely hesitant to pierce the corporate veil. So if you think about a shareholder like a bride, right? Can you tell I'm a visual learner? Think of a shareholder like a bride, and then go with like a 1980s bride, because the brides now don't put the veil over their face. Okay, so a 1980s bride, like the shareholder is like the bride, the veil of protection is the corporation. Okay, so courts are extremely hesitant to pierce that veil to get to the shareholder, because they know the whole reason we start corporations is to have that protection, that liability protection, right? Here's the key, as it says, don't give them a reason to. A big one, y'all. If you are commingling funds, like I mentioned, keep your business bank account, business stuff separate than your personal stuff. I started, and I know it's an LLC, but same story. I started an LLC for a client, and they were like, yeah, I've got 3 or 4 months of savings so that if I can't pay myself, I'm still okay, right? Like we got 3 or 4 months to get this thing going, kind of. And so I checked in a couple of months in, and he was like, oh my gosh, like I'm doing so good. He said, month 2, he said, I didn't pay myself a paycheck. Like I didn't have enough money to pay a full paycheck, but I had enough to pay my mortgage. I said, excuse me? I said, like you paid yourself and then you paid your mortgage? No, I just paid my mortgage. No, sir. I said, do not use your business bank account to pay your personal, like home mortgage. Because if you're commingling funds, guess what? When you get sued, then the court will go, oh, well, you've just been looking at it as one big pot. We can too, right? Then when you get sued, not only can they get to your business assets, but your personal assets. And you don't want them to pierce that corporate veil and get to your personal assets, okay? So that's a big one. But yeah, the biggest benefit is shareholders have, like anytime a big, huge corporation is going to get sued, generally, if it's run correctly, they're not getting to the shareholders, right? It's just the corporate assets. So any questions about any of that? Okay, here's our hybrids, and I've kind of alluded to some of this already. But so LLCs and S Corps are hybrids, okay? So we start with S Corp because I already said this, it's the easiest. An S Corp is a corporation in every way, okay? So it started with your articles of incorporation. you still have to have bylaws. You still have to have shareholders. You still have to have board of directors and potentially officers, depending on how it's set up in your bylaws and how many shareholders you have. But it's literally an election, right? And you are electing to be taxed like a partnership. Okay. So an S corp is a corporation in every way, but it's taxed as a partnership. And you're like, well, how do you get to do that? Or why do you get to do that? There is a list of about 9 things that you have to meet to be able to be an S corp. Only one class of stock, no foreign investors, less than 100 shareholders. There's a whole list, right? But it's literally it's supposed to be for small corporations, okay, that don't have a ton of money. So double taxation would kill you, okay? It's supposed to be helping out. And so that's why right now double taxation actually looks better for y'all. But when y'all are small and starting to actually make money and pay out to yourselves, an S corp might be a good option. LLCs are more of a true hybrid. Okay. So when I say that, like, I set up LLCs all the time. I love them. They're easy. So it's when it says a relatively new organizational form, we're talking like 1970s. Okay. So all these others, we've had corporations and partnerships and sole proprietorships since the dawn of time. I mean, really before America began, like we got a lot of that the way it's set up kind of from Europe, right? And so we have had these from the start of our country at least. But LLCs are new. And if you think about it, I said LLPs, all those limited partners control, manage, and run the business, but they also have limited liability, but it's only for professional businesses. Well, if you're like, well, hey, me and my best friend are going to start this food truck and there's some liability. We're serving people food and we're driving this truck around. We both want to run the business, but we both want limited liability. What's our option? And before 1970, whatever it is, 40, 74, 76, that there wasn't an option. Okay. And so now I'm like, oh, we have LLCs. Okay. So they're called members, the people that own. So the people that own a corporation, we said are shareholders. If you own a sole proprietorship, you're a sole proprietor. You own a partnership, you're a partner. If you own an LLC, you're a member. Okay. The owners of LLCs are called members. So all of the members can control, manage, and run the business, and they all have limited liability. Awesome, right? That's what we want. Generally, that's what we want, or a lot of times that's what we want. So the biggest downfall of an LLC is there is not a uniform statute. There's not a uniform LLC statute across all 50 states right now, okay? There's one that's been drafted, and I think it's been accepted by like 15 states maybe. I ask my students all the time, I'm like, so does that make it uniform? And they're like, nope, right? 15 out of 50 states, not a uniform law yet. So right now, you really have to pay attention to what state you're in and pay attention to the LLC laws of that state. And that's how it's going to be drafted, started, treated, everything. So if I have somebody come to me and they're like, yeah, we're moving fast, right? We want to be in all 50 states in the next 2 years. Probably not an LLC. It's probably not a good option, right? But if you come to me and you're like, do you see what I'm saying? Because then you got to deal with all 50 states and all these different statutes. If you say like, yeah, we're only going to be in Texas, like we live here, like this is all we're doing is Texas, like never growing, maybe grow in Texas, but not outside, cool. Or even if we're here, right, we're in the Panhandle. If you're like, oh, maybe someday we'll extend into New Mexico, that's cool. So we need to know Texas and New Mexico. That's not that big of a deal. Now there's things about, like I have one I started in Texas and he moved to Louisiana. And so I found him a Louisiana business law attorney, so that he could make sure his Texas LLC had the right licenses to be able to function legally in Louisiana. Okay. So, just if you were to kind of transition, just make sure that you know what you're dealing with. But so when starting an LLC, notice it says articles of organization must be filed. What does that sound like? Articles of incorporation, right? So that looks a lot like the document that you use to start a corporation is a lot like what it looks like to start an LLC. You're filing it with the Secretary of State, right? Then the cool part, notice it says flexible in taxation and management. So in those articles of organization, you literally get to decide, do I want to be taxed like this, or do I want to be taxed like this? And if you don't say anything, the default is pass-through, okay? It's partnership or pass-through taxation, but you get the choice. You also get the choice in how you want to be managed. So you can choose to be member managed or manager managed. Member managed looks like a partnership, like just a bunch of partners running it together, right? That's like a bunch of members running it together, okay? We're all coming to the office together. We're all making business decisions together. Does that make sense? Or if you're manager managed, that looks internally more like a corporation, because in a corporation, y'all have usually said, hey, we're going to have this CEO, or we're going to have this CFO, or we're going to have this COO, whatever, or president, vice president. So if your LLC is manager managed, you could have all these members that own it, but they've hired someone to run it for them, right? It's run by a manager, not run by the members. You see the flexibility? Like, I love it, because it's always still your LLC. Like, it's still the same business, but you're just choosing how we want to be managed. So maybe you're in your 40s and you and your 3 best friends start this LLC, and it's member managed for 20 years. And now it's up and running. We're all going to kind of retire or start like stepping back. So now we're going to convert it to manager managed. We're going to hire somebody to run it for us. We're just going to sit back and make money. Okay. Like, it's awesome, right? It's got all kinds of flexibility in taxation and in management. So I didn't say, kind of like after your articles of organization are filed and you get that back, then it's your operating agreement, which is really, it sounds like a partnership agreement and it sounds like bylaws, right? So the bylaws of a corporation and the partnership agreement of a partnership, this operating agreement, it tells how is our LLC going to operate. Okay. So you still have 2 documents like you do with a corporation. So I have not told y'all this. I want to make sure and share this. It says, what 3 people do you need when you start a business? What do y'all think? I've already mentioned a couple of them. Lawyer, CPA, insurance agent. Remember I said, don't go like sign up for some esurance.com. Find a good commercial insurance agent who sells commercial, like business insurance, because they can sit down and talk to you about like what your liability potential is, right? And where you need coverage and how much coverage you need. And then, because then you can talk about, like, if you're an LLC and you have that limited liability for all your owners, you might not need as much. But I mean, if the business doesn't have anything, right, you might need some good insurance for a while, because even if you've got $20,000 sitting there and you get sued, if you get sued for $50,000, right, y'all are gonna file for bankruptcy and your business is gone. If you had good insurance and it was $300,000 worth of insurance, if it pays out, right, then you still rock and roll with your business, keep your 20 grand and keep going. You just don't have to reorganize and start over just because you didn't want to pay for insurance, you know? So, I mean, think about, sometimes it's you're in like me, I rent my law firm, I rent an office building. So I have renter's insurance, right? If you have vehicles on the road, do you have like car insurance? But think about, and sometimes if you own the building, right? And a lot of it then is, but also like your malpractice insurance maybe, or like your like coverage of those kinds of things. So just talk about what all your liability potential is, and make sure you're covered properly. Okay, so I think, yeah, that's it. So do we have any, because it just says which door will you walk through, right? So you have, and that's what I tell students sometimes, like when we first start on day 1, sometimes there's a right answer and a wrong answer. Like if you told me you were going to start a bank, I'd be like, you need a corporation, right? There's lots of rules for banks. If you're going to start a women's boutique out of your dorm room, right, or something, I don't know, like a sole proprietorship is all you need. But if there are some that you have options, and that's why I talk to students. If I have somebody, not to students, to clients, if I have a client that says, hey, my uncle from Guatemala wants to invest in my business, well, you can have foreign investors with an LLC. You can't with an S corp. So then you kind of know like which things to mark off your list, like what is not an option for you depending on your situation, right? Are you a single person? Well, we know you only have 3 options. If there's 2 of you, we know we've got, does that make sense? So which door will you walk through? Find those good 3 professionals and then you'll be good. So